Nate, we are back, and this is going to be exciting because we are not only diving into your top 24-ish wide receiver rankings in Dynasty in the offseason, but we got rookies mixed in there as well.
Ooh,
Excited to dive on in. If you want more of our rankings, head on over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Not only do you get rankings, you get in our amazing Discord community group chat. Everybody loves it. Everybody's a big fan of it. So are we, and we're a fan of you. And if you are a fan of this show, leave a like, comment down below. We're going to have disagreements on rankings. It's how it is. It's how it'll always be. But, specifically with, where would you move players up? Where would you move players down? Who made the list that maybe shouldn't have? Who didn't make the list that maybe should have? With all that said, all the promo and intro in the books, let's get to the content that people came for. Nate, let's kick it off with tier one, a little
let's do it.
different than tier one has been for a while, I'd say. So what do you got in tier one?
I do have Justin Jefferson in this tier, and I think he is truly in a tier of his own. In a startup draft, I'm not going to worry too much about who I'm picking with in this tier, but certainly if I have a preference, Justin Jefferson is my wide receiver one in Dynasty. That is locked in, and it has been for a while now. But also in this tier, now this is the biggest this tier has been in a while. We have Jamar Chase, we have CeeDee Lamb, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who it has been a journey for me coming around to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Bob, you've been here for it. And I was not a big fan of him coming out of college. When he got the draft capital he got, I thought he deserved it. And what he's done and what he's turned himself into at the NFL has been really impressive. And you look at the fantasy points, while he doesn't have the down the field ability that guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase have, CeeDee Lamb, his volume and just the fact that he is so peppered with targets, he is so good at catching them and even making things happen after the catch. What he has done with the Lions so far in his first couple of years, it puts him into this top tier. I'd be happy having any one of these guys as the wide receiver one on my team. These are guys you build your team around. These are wide receivers you have for a decade on your team. We're really lucky to have this much talent at the top of the wide receiver position right now.
I love this grouping, and I love that you put Amon-Ra St. Brown in here. I don't actually even have him up in this tier one yet. He's in a tier of his own, just below these top three guys, but love the respect here, love the player. I don't think there is honestly, when you look at it, if you were to just take a blind profile of these guys and just compare them side by side, I don't think you'd be able to really pick out who's who outside of maybe especially if you wipe away ADOT, then you're definitely going to have trouble looking at these guys, and deciphering who's who. But love the respect here. Love the grouping that this has become. CeeDee Lamb ascending into this tier. Amon-Ra St. Brown ascending into this tier. And like you said, these are four amazing wide receivers to build around for the long term. You can't get much better. I don't think you can do better at wide receiver. Obviously, let's get Justin Jefferson in first and foremost, but everybody's going to have their preferences. So with all that said, getting into tier two now, another good tier, a lot of talent here, a lot of fun here. I'm not even going to spoil it. I'll let you do this. Let's go. Let's talk about it.
All right. Tier two. Well, let's start off with the oldest guy first, and that's AJ Brown. AJ Brown, I know, kind of felt like he was up and down this year, but you look back at the game log, and outside of that game where he went off on the sideline asking for targets, he was very consistent with scoring a lot of points. And I know the Eagles' offense was not what they were in 2022, but AJ Brown still produced. He was still a top wide receiver in fantasy football. He's still just entering his prime as a wide receiver. I believe in Jalen Hurts. I don't know if I think he's the best quarterback in the NFL, but he certainly can go out there and help us have AJ Brown and Devonta Smith be top wide receivers in fantasy football. So AJ Brown, he's got the long-term contract with the Eagles. His future looks consistent, looks good. I'm happy to have him in this tier two, but he is the oldest of this tier two. And moving from AJ Brown, we go to Garrett Wilson, who is also just a stud wide receiver, but because of the quarterback issues with the Jets, he just hasn't really had the opportunity to put up a season that would put him, in that conversation with those top four guys. But with his youth, his draft capital, the expectations that we had for him coming out of college, and even coming into this year, when we were thinking Aaron Rodgers was going to be healthy for the season, if Aaron Rodgers had been healthy this season and Garrett Wilson had put up, possibly a top 5 wide receiver season, we might be talking about Garrett Wilson entering into that top tier. Maybe that top tier gets split up into 2 tiers because once you have 5 or 6 guys in there, you got to split up a little bit maybe. But Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers should be healthy this year. I'm not worried about the Achilles injury. He's not a guy who's going to be running around the pocket very much anyway. So I think Garrett Wilson's going to have a really impressive third season. That's going to put him in that conversation with that top tier. I don't know if he's going to be in that top tier because it's hard to be there. Those guys are really impressive and have been doing it at a high level for a while now. But Garrett Wilson, he is really knocking on that door. I think the talent that he brings to the table, the target share that he had with the Jets last year, he's doesn't really have much competition in that wide receiver room, and he's been productive even with the terrible quarterbacks he's had thrown to him. So I think Garrett Wilson is firmly in this tier, knocking on the door of the next tier, Bob. And moving on to the next player, I got second-year player Puka Nacua in tier 2, Bob. After the season that Puka Nacua had, one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen, I couldn't put him any lower. Because if Puka Nacua was a first, second round pick and he had the season that he had, everyone would have him in this tier. Because that's Garrett Wilson. We wish Garrett Wilson had put up a Puka Nacua season so far. Nakua's done it. We've seen it with Amon-Ra St. Brown. The day 3 draft capital, if you're at wide receiver, it doesn't matter as much. If you're a productive wide receiver, especially to the elite level that we saw Puka Nacua this year, playing with Cooper Kupp, it's not like he was just playing in an offense that had no competition for him. You know, he learned from Cooper Kupp. He's right there, you know, playing across from Cooper Kupp and putting up his own numbers, you know, not worried about what Kupp's doing on the other side. So I think Puka Nacua proved to me in his rookie season, I'm turning around on him. I'm not going to take 3 years to do it like I did with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm on the Puka Nacua train, and I got to have him in my, you know, top 6, 7 wide receivers because of the season that he had as a rookie. You get the youth, you get the productivity right away. I'm not worried about the Matthew Stafford retirement question mark. He's going to be there next year. He throws the ball really, really well. I know Stafford, you know, he's getting older, but he's still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. So I'm happy having Puka Nacua here, Bob. I don't know. Do you think that this is a hot take, having Nacua up here this high?
I think there are probably some that are going to be feeling that it is a hot take or maybe just a little too high. But for me, I'm with you. I like you said, with if this would have been anyone else that was drafted day 1, day 2, they are probably knocking on the door of that top tier, and or maybe creating a new tier outside of tier 1 that's a different tier 2 than we have the dynamic of right now. And you brought up an awesome point with, you know, comparing him to Cooper Kupp while they were both healthy. And, you know, it'd be one thing if Puka Nacua was really good weeks 1 through whatever till Kupp came back, and then he Travis Fulghamed himself into obscurity again. But that didn't happen. Like, this dude was still very productive
He almost
all
got
season
better
long.
sometimes.
Yeah, you know, it's hard for me to look at this situation and think, yeah, he's just going to go back to being a pumpkin. And that's exactly what everybody did with Amon-Ra St. Brown was, oh, he was just a product of the offense because he was the only one there. I don't see that happening. Puka Nacua was dang good in about every metric you could look for, was a good route runner, a great player, efficient.
And he's only 22 years old.
Yeah, I think, you know, we could almost make an argument to split this tier with Puka Nacua and AJ Brown because you already have the production and youth there of those 2 players, as opposed to the other 2 players in this tier 1 we haven't mentioned yet. But with Garrett Wilson, younger, hasn't had that pop off year yet, doesn't necessarily have that locked in production that we feel good about with Puka Nacua and AJ Brown. But I am very much a fan of Puka Nacua, and it does feel like kind of gross, but like you said, if you take away the early negative of the draft capital and just look at him for what he did the entire season, insanity to not have him this high, in my opinion, and what he did in general. So let's wrap up this tier. Your surprise one here, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think this will be a surprise for too many people, but let's talk about it. Go ahead.
We might be projecting a little bit, but Bob, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. in this tier. This is the first rookie that we see in the rankings and coming into the NFL at tier 2 with a player that just had the best rookie season that we've seen. You know, the expectations are sky high for Marvin Harrison Jr., but I truly believe he's going to match it. He's going to be a top 5 pick. You know, right now he's the betting favorite to go to the Cardinals. Marvin Harrison Jr. as the wide receiver 1 for Kyler Murray long term. That sounds like fantasy gold. Sounds like, you know, a dream come true. You know, and even if he doesn't go to the Cardinals, he's going to go somewhere, be a wide receiver 1. He's going to be invested into, and he's one of the best wide receiver prospects I've scouted. but there's not too much competition, honestly. We've seen some really good prospects come out. Jamar Chase was a really good prospect, but he didn't play his final season in college, and that left some question marks, on his prospect profile. So Marvin Harrison Jr., what he's done has been really impressive. He's going to come in. I expect him to have, maybe not a Puka Nacua rookie season, but I think a lot of us are expecting to have something close to that, honestly. Now, maybe our expectations are a little high, but with how wide receivers have hit so far in their rookie season over the past couple of years and how close the college game has gotten to the NFL game offensively, I don't think those expectations are really out of whack. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. certainly can see 120, 130 targets his rookie season, catch 1,200 receiving yards and, 10 touchdowns with his red zone prowess. So, if he puts a season like that together, he might be knocking on tier 1 as well after his rookie season. So, our expectations for Marvin Harrison Jr. here are really high. Outside of the Dynasty Rewind, they're really high. He seems to be the next guy, man. And we're all here. I'm ready for it. You're ready for it, Bob. And I'm projecting him, putting him here in tier 2 already.
Yeah, I struggle with this because I know that he will be valued as a top 10 dynasty wide receiver. But I always lean on with rookies tempering expectations. And if you can go into this, have him here, especially if you're going into a startup draft and you're looking at wide receivers, and you can select him with the expectation that, hey, it might not be perfect right away. Everybody adjusts to the NFL differently. He could have a slow start and then, blow up later. Totally possible. He could blow up right away. I'm not saying he won't. And I hesitate to put him in this tier solely because of what we already have here, what we already have in terms of production that's already happened, what we have with expected uptick already with like Garrett Wilson. So I'm hesitant, but like I get it. Like he should probably be a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty. And it's when you want to put him in, the top 5 already.
Yeah.
That I have like really concerns with. I don't hate it. I think the value of what Marvin Harrison will be kind of shakes out here, especially looking ahead at this next tier.
Yeah.
I think it is all pretty, it makes sense with what we have in the next tier and how that tier is kind of molding. But enough about prefacing the next tier. Let's just get right into it. Who's in your tier 3 fun tier here? All of these wide receivers are so much fun to talk about, but let's talk about this tier here.
Yeah, I have a lot of shares of players in this tier because this tier was sitting, 2 or 3 tiers down for the last couple of years. And we've had the veterans at the wide receivers position kind of work their way down the board, and these guys have risen up. And while some of these guys might not have the exciting upside of a top 5 season already or a top 5 season that maybe we're expecting, they've all been really consistent. I really like this tier here. I think there's a lot of value here. To start out though, I'm going to go with the oldest guy again because he kind of doesn't sit with the rest of the guys as well, but I think value-wise belongs in this tier, and that's Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, we've heard the rumors, he's going to retire in 2 years from now. He kind of backed away from those after he had that interview. I'm not too worried about it. Whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is, what we've seen from Tyreek Hill over the last couple of years, he's the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. Like Justin Jefferson is the dynasty wide receiver 1, and he is the best wide receiver moving forward because he's got the youth on his side. But there is no better wide receiver at this exact moment than Tyreek Hill. He lives in open space. He is impossible to cover. His speed is it is ridiculous. The production that you're getting with him outweighs, the con of his age right now. We look at these rankings, especially now that we're in February, we're looking at these rankings in the off-season view. We're looking at value. Instant production is maybe devalued a little bit for long-term value. Tyreek Hill kind of breaks that mold because of the production he gives you right away. I mean, he was on pace to break the record for receiving yards this year for most of the season. And if he didn't have an injury and the Miami Dolphins offense didn't kind of fall apart at the end of the year, he likely would have broken the record. And I don't think there's any reason to think he's going to fall off in the next 2 years. He's still, I think he's only 29. So he's really in the middle of his prime, maybe getting towards the end of it. But what he's bringing to the table year in and year out for your football team is a championship ability. I think Tyreek Hill has to be in this tier just because of what he brings fantasy points wise. But Bob, it's Dynasty Fantasy Football. We love the youth. We love the young guys, and the rest of the tier are these young guys getting into their prime right now that I'm really excited about. And his teammate, Jalen Waddle, is in this tier. Jalen Waddle, we saw a really impressive, start to his career. last year was a bit more up and down, but it's been more of an issue for Jalen Waddle with getting on the field than actual production, because we know that when he's on the field, even with Tyreek Hill across him, he has been productive and he has that upside. We saw him get peppered with targets his rookie season. So we know that he can also be the wide receiver 1 in an offense. He doesn't have to be the wide receiver 2 to excel. There are some wide receivers out there that are really good wide receiver 2s who just can't excel at the same levels as a wide receiver 1 for a team, but just do really well in that role as a wide receiver 2. Jalen Waddle can do both, and we've seen that. Really like what he brings to the table. He's only 25, so he's just getting into his prime. Love that. Another guy kind of similar, also former college teammate, Devonta Smith. Talking about wide receiver 2s who are like elite wide receiver 2s, that's Devonta Smith. I do believe he could be a wide receiver 1 on a team like he was his rookie year, and he performed just fine. But he does so well as the wide receiver 2 across from A.J. Brown. They're dynamic, their play styles and how they work off of each other. It works really well for the Eagles. And as long as they're in that situation, I think Devonta Smith is going to continue to put up fantasy points, be a threat down the field like he has been. And in some games, he's being targeted more than A.J. Brown. He's a pretty good compliment there. It's not truly that big of a gap between the two. So I like what I've seen with Devonta Smith, not letting himself fall that far behind A.J. Brown and keeping it competitive. That makes me happy to have him in this tier. These guys all have target competition, Bob. That's a similar thing among all of these guys. So next up is Brandon Ayuk, who has a lot of target competition with the 49ers offense. And there's rumors about him not coming back to the 49ers offense. There's rumors of him being tagged and traded. We'll see. We'll see if he's in a different place where he's the wide receiver 1. I think Brandon Ayuk could be a top 5, top 6 wide receiver. I truly do. I think he's got that ability. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. I think his fantasy production just lags behind a little bit than some of these other guys because of the offense that he's on and the target competition that he has. So if he stays in the 49ers, I'm still very interested. I still love what he's done. If he goes somewhere else, I do really want to stress that I think Brandon Ayuk has top 5 upside. I truly think, like how we saw Stephon Diggs lead the Vikings and then become a top 5 wide receiver for the Bills, I think Brandon Ayuk could do. I think that is certainly within the realm of possibilities. We'll just see if he gets that opportunity. Bob, last player in this tier who just made it into this tier after the season. He kind of had a breakout season this year, and his quarterback being just so dang good makes me have the confidence to put him in this tier to be the 13th player, wide receiver 13 for me, finishing off this top 12 plus 1. Nico Collins, to me, is the wide receiver 1 for CJ Stroud. We'll talk about his teammate Tank Dell a little bit later. But Nico Collins, his ability to create after the catch at his size, and the fact that, he has really become a well-rounded wide receiver. CJ Stroud's throwing him the ball. I expect the Houston Texans to sign him to a long-term deal, whether this offseason or sometime during next year. Nico Collins is the guy for the Texans, I think, moving forward. And with his size and ability to create yards, I just really like what he brings to the table with that. I've talked about it before, like, can you get open? Can you create yards after catch? Can you win it at the catch point and get contested catches? Those are the 3 most important things for me for a wide receiver. He checks all 3. And there's not many guys who do all 3 at a really great level. And this year he did all 3 at a top level. Top 5 in yards after the catch per reception this year. That's really impressive. So Nico Collins, he does get into this tier for me. So rounding out tier 3 for me, Bob.
Yeah, if there was one player, just touching on Nico Collins, if there was one player that I would pick out of this grouping to ascend to the above grouping, it would be Nico Collins. And I know we're looking at, this breakout that was in hindsight. Hindsight is 2020. I get it. But when you look at how Nico Collins performed when healthy, and that was a big thing, just could not get his health right year 1 and 2. And obviously was playing with not great quarterback play. And I know a lot of people were down on CJ Stroud. We heard it a lot. We were pretty big proponents of CJ Stroud here. And I don't think anybody necessarily expected this massive first year out of CJ Stroud. So, again, hindsight's 2020. But linked to CJ Stroud, blowing up, finally he plays a healthy season, elite play all around. I think this is low for Nico, honestly. And, should he be top 10? I don't think he has to be yet, because I don't think anybody values him that way. And that's a big thing with rankings too, is, just because you value somebody as top 10, don't draft them as top 10 or trade for them at top 10, trade them at their current market value. And then, especially if you expect them to be top 10, you get a little, ROI, or you get,
Yeah.
buy low on a player than you should be able to. But this is probably my favorite player in this tier in terms of their cost to acquire. I think he's probably the cheapest out of this tier to acquire.
He's also the
I think
youngest
he's
in this tier.
the youngest in the tier, bonus points. And I think he has the chance to be, outside of Tyreek Hill, the most productive. And when you mix all that pot together, plus all the incredible things he did analytically and statistically, wheels up for Nico Collins. I'm all about it. And I love him in this year. I think I have 0 shares of Nico Collins across
Oh,
my leagues.
that's tough.
And I tell you what, if you watch our moves to make video, that's going to change. That's mission number 1 for next week's moves to make. So, spoiler alert, that's going to be happening. So, speaking of no more spoilers, let's get into tier 4. This is probably the most interesting tier for me in terms of just who's here. And we got some surprises, some questions, some thoughts. Talk about your tier 4 name.
All right, tier 4's got 4 players in it. All right, so tier 4, we got 4 players in tier 4, and let's start off with the oldest player in this tier, Bob, and that is DJ Moore, 26 going on 27, and he is the wide receiver 1 for the Bears currently. There's some mock drafts that have the Bears maybe taking a wide receiver in the first round to pair with him. There's also a lot of mock drafts that are telling us that the Bears are expected to draft Caleb Williams. And I personally like the idea of DJ Moore being the wide receiver 1 for Caleb Williams. I think that it could be lucrative for our fantasy teams. And DJ Moore showed us this year, we coming into the season, the big question mark was, all right, is Justin Fields going to get better? But not only is Justin Fields going to get better for DJ Moore, but are the Bears going to be able to pass enough for DJ Moore to even be relevant in fantasy football? I know, Bob, we had a lot of conversation this offseason where you were not a big fan of DJ Moore because, the Bears had passed like 42% of the time in 2022. So there just wasn't a lot of volume there. They did become the second largest jump in pass percentage last year. They jumped up to over 50% pass plays. So that volume did jump. And what we saw from DJ Moore was a wide receiver 9 finish in points per game. He averaged 16.9 fantasy points per game. Some of that number was obviously inflated by some really big games. But hey, DJ Moore has played 17 games the last 3 years. He has had 96 receptions this year, 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's constantly productive. You go back, this guy is always out there. He creates yards after the catch. He can be the wide receiver 1 for a team. And whether it's Justin Fields, whether it's Caleb Williams, whether there's a wide receiver across from him, I think DJ Moore, only going into his 27-year-old season, is still a top 15, certainly top 20 wide receiver in Dynasty. I don't think I'm worried about his age yet, even though he has been around for a while. He's played 6 seasons. He came into the league very young. I still think we got another 4 or 5 seasons out of DJ Moore. We're going to be looking back at DJ Moore 4 or 5 years from now, and he's going to be considered, a really good wide receiver because of his longevity, his, consistency, even on bad teams. He has always been productive. This might be the best year for DJ Moore. Coming off what already was the best year for his fantasy football, depending on what that wide receiver competition looks like, if it's not Roma Dunze or Malik Neighbors in the first round, I think DJ Moore with a Caleb Williams, even a rookie Caleb Williams, could have his best season yet. If not, next season would look pretty good as well. I don't think we're on the downside of DJ Moore, so I wanted to include him here. I wanted to make sure we talked about him a good bit.
My thing with DJ Moore, and I think this is very appropriate ranking of him, because what we've had with DJ Moore so far is several seasons of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 2, finally breaks wide receiver 1. And I love that you have him as a wide receiver 2, because I think that's where he should be, because, as much as his situation might finally be kind of coming around, we've seen far more wide receiver 2 DJ Moore than wide receiver 1. And the thing is, that's okay. Like you said, consistent play, reliable play is not a bad thing. But when it becomes a bad thing, like all those people with Terry McLaurin years ago, trying to put him as a wide receiver 1 for how dang long, and it just never came to fruition. Some guys are just very good wide receiver 2s, can finish as wide receiver 1s, because, when you look at this list, not all these young guys are going to crack the top 12 just because they're young, they're still acclimated to the NFL, whatever the case is. But DJ Moore, very likely, in my opinion, is probably a better wide receiver 2 expectation wise for you than plugging him in as a wide receiver 1. I'd love to have him as on any of my teams as a wide receiver 2. Obviously, even better as a flex play, but that's kind of where I'm at with DJ Moore.
Yeah.
I do admit that I tend to look at things through somewhat of a pessimistic lens. When a player has been a pumpkin their entire career, and then they blow up one season, and it's, wide receiver 9, I wouldn't call when he's been a steady Eddie wide receiver 2 for the most part, I wouldn't call it a huge blow up.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely possible he ascends, but right now, this is where his value should be. If he comes back and has a top 6 season, that's another discussion we'll have to have. And if you want to project that, that's fine. But go buy him at the cost that he is now, which is and should be a high-end wide receiver 2 in Dynasty, not anything more, in my opinion. Full pun intended, DJ Moore. But
I think with DJ Moore, if you wanted to kind of find a fantasy comp, I think to say DJ Moore's floor, his fantasy comp is kind of like Amari Cooper. Different players, but like Amari Cooper's been a really consistent wide receiver 2 over the past, I think it's been about 10 years he's been around. The last 2 years, he's actually been a wide receiver 17 in points per game both years. So, that consistency, he's not, you don't want him to be your wide receiver 1 on a team. And if you're a really competitive team in a really competitive league, maybe not even your wide receiver 2. But if he's your wide receiver 3, that floor you're getting from him, that availability you're getting from him, because I think he's only missed like 3 games the last couple seasons. Those players you need in your team to be competitive. And, like we've seen with Amari Cooper and DJ Moore this year, that upside they bring on a week-to-week basis as well. They can win you a week. They have that potential. So I think DJ Moore has a bit more upside than Amari Cooper.
Sure.
But I think looking at that as a floor, I like DJ Moore.
Yeah, and I think he has a huge thing going for him with, either if it stays Justin Fields, not saying it is, or if it's Caleb Williams, having that good quarterback is definitely a nod in his cap. You're a feather in his cap. Nod to him, feather in his cap. Those are how those sayings go. But let's get to this next player in the tier. I'm a huge fan of this player. I feel like he should be higher, but
I feel like he should be too.
I get it.
But exactly, you get it, Bob. Chris Olave. I want to kind of put him in tier 3, but Derek Carr is going to be there for the next 2 years. They've kind of restructured his deal. That's going to commit them to Derek Carr for the next 2 years. So we know the quarterback situation going forward. And I honestly don't think the Derek Carr situation is a bad situation, but it's also not a great situation.
Right.
Michael Thomas is a free agent this year. Things look good for Chris Olave, honestly. There's not a lot of bad going his way. He's in a consistent situation. It could be better, sure, but he's not going to have a lot of target competition. There's not a lot of other wide receivers there that are going to be competing with him. Maybe they bring somebody in, but either way, Chris Olave is the wide receiver 1 there. Now, him being the wide receiver 1 there and matching that with fantasy production that puts him into the upper tiers, I'm just not sure if he offers that upside at the moment. I do think he's a very good wide receiver, and obviously he's still here in my top 15. I still rank Chris Olave pretty well, but I just think his ceiling in the current situation just seems to be a little bit less than these other guys. He has been productive. He has not had really bad seasons. He's been quietly productive, I think, actually, in New Orleans. So I do think he's a value in a lot of leagues where you probably can get him a little bit cheaper than top 15 prices. And I think Chris Olave might just end up kind of being that DJ Moore player where he's going to give you really consistent wide receiver 2 production. That's kind of where I'm at with Chris Olave, and that's why he's in this tier.
Yeah, real quick, just touching on him in terms of the value. In one of our moves to make video, we go through trades that have already happened, trades that have been completed. One of those trades was moving a player in one of Zach's leagues, a dynasty manager in one of Zach's leagues, sent Chris Olave away for, I believe it was the 111, and I want to say it was some running back to the tune of Khalil Herbert.
Oh, wow.
And because
such good value.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you're going to get that done in your league. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is when players that you believe in the talent of may not have the sexiest situation or, might just not be super loved in the dynasty space by everyone right now, because you have to remember one of the biggest things in dynasty is that not everybody who's on everyone's team is loved by the person that has them on their team, because they did not necessarily draft that player, and they didn't necessarily draft that player at anything more than a value draft, like, oh, Chris Olave at the 108. I may
This
as
is
well
why
draft
you
him.
always go, and as soon as someone joins your league and takes over an orphan, you go and
Right.
knock on their door right away. This
Hmm.
is why.
Because you never know. It's just natural psychology in Dynasty to like and dislike players for whatever reason. There's 10 reasons to love Chris Olave. There's 10 reasons to not like Chris Olave. Everybody's going to fall on different sides of that. Just like with any opinion, any, debate dynamic, there's pros and cons. There's cons and pros depending on how you're talking about it. So just 100% go knock on the door. You never know. And, people can sour on guys real quick if they weren't high on them to begin
Yeah.
with. Like I'm not selling Chris Olave at that price because I love Chris Olave and I'm not wavering on that at all. But with that said, let's talk about some players that are going to be drafted for sure in rookie drafts coming up. Who do you got in this next tier, or this continuing tier, I should say?
Yeah, so
in
we're
tier 4.
finishing out tier 4 here. We've already talked about the first two players, and the next two players are rookies, incoming rookies, and I have both Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors on here, Bob. Now, some people might open their eyes up pretty wide to hear that I have Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze in the same tier, because there's a lot of Neighbors hype out there. And if you want to put, if Neighbors gets a really good situation, say he goes to the Chargers. Now, I have some question marks about Jim Harbaugh and his pass rate that would kind of affect my opinion there. But a lot of people would probably put Malik Neighbors firmly in the tier 3 with his upside, him being linked to a guy like Justin Herbert. But until we have landing spots, until we have draft capital locked in, and we get these guys in the field, I have them here. Because DJ Moore, Chris Olave, they're not wide receivers to just brush aside. While I have a lot of expectations from Malik Neighbors to be a really, really good wide receiver, he actually comps for a lot of people, including myself, to DJ Moore as kind of that all-around athletic wide receiver. Neighbors obviously not getting into the league yet has that upside of, hey, can he maybe surpass what we've seen with DJ Moore and be that style wide receiver, but at a wide receiver 1 level? I think Malik Neighbors definitely has the potential to get into tier 2 and that high level of the wide receiver dynasty landscape. But until we've seen that production, this is where it's going to be for me. It's easy to get rookie fever and see these guys who have never played a snap and instantly put them into the top 10 because we're just excited about them and they're going to get top 10 draft capital. But I still need to see it on the field. I need to see that, where they're going to go, how they're going to be used. There's still some question marks. So Neighbors is here, still very highly ranked. I believe we're still, at like wide receiver 15, 16 right now. And then Rome Odunze as well. Someone I absolutely love. I have graded out pretty close to Malik Neighbors, actually. Very different players. Neighbors brings a bit more athleticism to the game, but Rome Odunze is not a bad athlete himself. He's versatile after the catch and has been used in kick return opportunities and done really well there. So that combined with just being one of the best contested catch guys in this draft class, and I expect him to also have top 10 draft capital. I think Rome Odunze can be a wide receiver 1 at the next level. Like a lot of people, Marvin Harrison Jr., yeah, he's a wide receiver 1. Malik Neighbors, yeah, he's a wide receiver 1. There's a narrative that maybe Rome Odunze needs to be a high-end level wide receiver 2. And I could definitely see that being a possibility. But I also think, until we've seen it or not seen it, he has the potential to be a wide receiver 1, 2 with the talent that he's brought on the field that we've seen at Washington. So, this rounds out my tier 4, about my top 17 wide receivers. And like I said before, we are really lucky to have the wide receiver talent that we have right now. There's a lot of guys still that we're going to talk about that are really, really good, really, really talented. And you could argue that some of those guys maybe go over these rookies, but we have 3 rookies already in the top 17. And I think, Bob, you probably agree with them being in the top 17, right?
Yeah, if not the top 17, definitely the top 20, which this next
Yeah.
tier gets to. And I like both Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze a lot. I know there's going to be discussions about who we talk in this next year going over them.
Yeah.
But like if you try to trade those rookie picks for these players, I don't know that it happens. The picks that you would need to draft Malik Neighbors in a rookie draft or Rome Odunze, I don't think those deals get done for those players. I think people would rather have the picks, which tells me that value-wise, which is a big part of how I rank, the rookies would go ahead. But I see the discussion too to have what we get into with this next year being up in this year as well. One player, especially, another one I get. And then there's a big surprise in this tier. So there's a lot of fun in this. All these tiers are so fun, Nate. All
Oh,
these tiers
thank
are
you.
so fun. But with all that said, I think we've covered tier 4 a good bit, and I don't want to, keep prefacing the next one. Let's get into tier 5. Talk about a big bird in the room on this one. What do you got in tier
Yep.
5?
So we got 3 guys in tier 5 here, and that means we're rounding up the top 20. So first guy we'll talk about, and someone that we've talked about quite a bit on this channel, Drake London. Currently within my top 20 wide receivers. I have him here at top tier 5. I've always loved the talent of Drake London. Well, actually, I take that back. I haven't always loved the talent of Drake London, but recently I've come around to liking Drake London a good bit more. And then over the past year or so, it's really been just the situation when Arthur Smith was there and just the lack of volume, lack of raw targets that was really holding him back from a fantasy level. Always, over the past year or so, I thought he's been a good wide receiver. He obviously had the first round draft capital, high draft capital, but the situation just hasn't worked out for him to be a fantasy football productive asset. Arthur Smith's not there anymore. Raheem Morris is the head coach there, and they brought in the passing game coordinator from the Rams to be their offensive coordinator. And from what it sounds like, he has full control of that offense. Raheem Morris is a defensive coach. So it sounds like Zach Robinson's going to have full control of this offense. And there's a lot of pieces to like in this offense. Someone that's going to get the ball in the hands of his playmakers. I think that's going to be the main gist of this offense. That's how they're going to be looking to move on from Arthur Smith. And Zach Robinson's going to use Bijan Robinson. He's going to use Kyle Pitts. And he's going to use Drake London because we're going to see much more passing out of this offense. They have to figure out the quarterback situation, but there's still a buy window, I think, where you can get value on Drake London right now, because once this offense materializes with the pieces it has, as long as it has a decent quarterback, which we've seen everything from Justin Fields going to the Falcons, maybe Kirk Cousins goes there, who knows, but there's definitely going to be an upgrade over Desmond Ridder. And if the volume goes up, Drake London doesn't have a lot of competition in the wide receiver room. He could have a really productive fantasy football season. He could really turn around, I don't want to say he's got to turn around his career because he's been a good wide receiver, but he could turn around his fantasy football career, because what we've seen so far has been high-end wide receiver 3 numbers. And I know, we all know Drake London is better than that. He just has not had the opportunity to. He now has the opportunity to. So I expect him to put up a top 24 wide receiver season. I expect him to, he has the potential. I think he's going to be a top wide receiver 2, like a top high-end wide receiver 2 this year. But if there's not much competition in that wide receiver room and that offense starts humming, Drake London has the possibility without much competition to be a wide receiver 1. I think he could enter into that fringe top 12 area with a really good season from the Falcons offense. So with that upside now that he brings with a higher floor, because they're not going to be dead last in the NFL with pass plays, I'm back in on Drake London, Bob.
Like you said, the buy window, any buy low window that exists, slams shut the second they figure out quarterback. Whether it's in free agency, there are a lot of free agent quarterbacks out there. Not a ton of great ones, but there's free agent quarterbacks out there. And then obviously the draft, they're in okay position to draft one. They might need to trade up or whatever, or they could, JJ McCarthy is probably sitting there at their pick.
Yeah. Well, maybe not now. I don't know, man. A lot of hype. Sounds like JJ McCarthy might be quarterback 2, quarterback 3 for some teams.
Yeah, that's nuts for 1 or 2 teams at least. It only takes 1 or 2 to say he's a top 2 or 3. Yeah. But I think the second that happens, the door slams shut. A lot of people, more people are going to put him as a top 12 dynasty wide receiver if they don't have him there already, with the assumption of that happening. So I think, and this goes back to, I know a lot of the comments saying that, there's no buy low window on Drake London because all the Drake London truthers have him. Probably true. The people who still have Drake London probably really like Drake London, but every single year there's turnover in leagues, there's orphans, there's new league mates, there's drafts where maybe they're just taking the guy at a value, whatever the case is. There's people out there still willing to sell Drake London for probably lower than he should. But with all that said, it's not a guarantee. Never is. So I think that, the sky is trending upwards. I wouldn't call it the limit, but I could see a low end wide receiver 1 finish this season possible if that offense gets into a rhythm. And I don't think a high end wide receiver 2 would be bad for how young he is. It'd be good for his trajectory. Like, next year he would be realistically and rightfully, I'd say, ranked as a low end wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. But buy appropriately, buy at market values. Do not buy low for what you think he could be, because fact of the matter is that could still never happen. Speaking of player, this is the one I was surprised to not see higher, because we
Okay.
saw a pretty dang good season
Yeah.
from this player, and didn't even get to play with his starting quarterback all year, but still played well with his backup quarterback, and put together a career year. A guy that we both felt coming into the season, even though I wasn't in love with this player, I felt like he was valued fairly low for what he is. Ended up having a good year. Talk about him.
Yeah, Michael Pittman Jr. for the Colts had a really good year. Put up just over 1,100 yards, 109 receptions, only had 4 touchdowns. And you talk about maybe if Anthony Richardson was there, would that number would certainly go up, you would think, let alone the other numbers possibly. So, I don't think Gardner Minshew is a bad quarterback though. So I'm not going to actually say that the receptions is necessarily going to go up from what he saw this year. 109, a career year for him. Receiving yards might, his yards per catch, I expect with Anthony Richardson's arm could certainly go up. But I think 109, he had 156 targets this year. I mean, it's not likely to go up much more than that.
Sure.
That's pretty high already. But Michael Pittman Jr., he's a free agent this year. I think he comes back to the Colts, but he's a wide receiver 1 for a team. Now, where my question marks come in, Josh Downs is there. We're big fans of Josh Downs. I don't think he's going to take over the wide receiver 1 position from Michael Pittman Jr., who I do think remains a Colt. We also have Alec Pierce there, who, is certainly just a role player as a downfield threat, but I believe he had almost 600 yards this year. So he's definitely going to, take up some of the competition there, some of the production. So while Michael Pittman Jr. is the wide receiver 1 for the Colts, I think just the target competition there and Anthony Richardson being a more mobile quarterback, maybe the overall passing play volume is a little bit lower than league average. So all that kind of plays into just a little bit of a limit on Michael Pittman's volume ceiling, is how I'm going to put it. And I think we've kind of seen his production line up with that. So he's played 4 years. His rookie year, he missed the start of the season. Did end up having just over 500 yards, but we're going to kind of throw that year out. The 3 seasons since then, he's finished as the wide receiver 22 in points per game, the wide receiver 21 in points per game, and then this year, in a career year, they're wide receiver 14 in points per game, at 15.6 fantasy points per game. Great numbers, but not top 12, not wide receiver 1 numbers. He's just outside of that cusp. And Bob, that brings us to maybe, once again, this same mold of a really good wide receiver 2. And I think that's where I currently have Michael Pittman Jr. pegged. I certainly see a path to Michael Pittman Jr. having a top 12 wide receiver season, and then us moving him up to tier, maybe 2 tiers. And, I could do that very easily. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he wins in contested catch-up situations, he can create yards. Michael Pittman Jr. is extremely talented. But until I've seen that connection with Anthony Richardson turn into a top 12 wide receiver season, I just currently have Michael Pittman pegged for, a top wide receiver 2. And, another season or 2 of that, and we probably can move him into that DJ Moore tier, which is just the next tier up. He's just a tier down from me. I want to see what that Colts offense looks at. So I feel like this is a very realistic view of Michael Pittman Jr. Without projecting too much. But if you do want to project Michael Pittman Jr. and move him up a tier or 2, I don't have much problem with that because I think he's very talented.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree, putting it into that context of like, this passing game offense might be a little limited. And that's, with the play style of not only Anthony Richardson, but having Jonathan Taylor back there
Yeah, I
who
mean,
can pound the rock as good as anybody. This could be a pretty, run friendly scheme. And, granted, thankfully, there's not a ton of passing options, there is some. Obviously, we love Josh Downs, and Alec Pierce is a fun role player, like you said.
They've also been mocked a lot of wide receivers. I don't think they need another wide receiver personally, but there's a lot of mock drafts that are like, oh, the Colts need somebody else. I don't know if they're going to do that.
Could that be partially with expectation that Michael Pittman might be leaving? Could that be with that kind of?
I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where the explanation is even, hey, Michael Pittman stays, but we still need to get him something else. Which, like I said, I think Alec Pierce
Put some respect on Josh Downs.
Yeah, and Josh Downs. Come on, but we'll see. I'm just throwing it out there that there's if they get somebody else in there, even if it's a day 2 pick, that would just muddy it up a bit more.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I think as is, I don't hate it. I could see him up a little higher, like you said. Definitely not any lower than this. But this next player, is probably the most shocking for me on this entire list. Again, based on what we have in the next tier,
Yeah,
because
I get it.
I am, I wasn't even looking at the full tier, but now I'm looking at the full tier. I'm like, holy smokes.
And you're like, why isn't this guy in the next tier? He
So
obviously just belongs with the other guys.
even that, but like, sure. I mean, you just compare where all these guys were going in drafts last year, except for one, obviously, went a lot later than the guy we're about to talk to and the other guys in the tier. But let's, without further ado, talk about this player, Nate.
All right, to round off this tier, we have Rashee Rice, Bob. Mahomes is wide
Crazy.
receiver 1. Travis Kelce's getting a little bit older. Rashee Rice puts together a really good season. A really good season. We're really happy with what he's done. If anyone else came in and did this for the Chiefs and Mahomes, we would be ecstatic. But hey, Rashee Rice did it after the last 5 guys couldn't do it, which now means, they're going to draft somebody else and he's going to do the same thing Rashee Rice did. That's what everyone's expectation is. Everyone is down on Rashee Rice right now because they're like, oh, well, obviously they're going to draft somebody else who's obviously going to be better than Rashee Rice because that's just how this works. Even though if you go back and look, they haven't had a freaking good wide receiver since Tyreek Hill left, and they've drafted a couple different guys. So what's this expectation all of a sudden after seeing all these wide receivers not work out for Mahomes? You finally get what you want, and you say, oh, well, I actually don't want that. I want the next thing because it's going to be even better. It's only going to get better. I don't think they're going to draft somebody in round 1. And even if they do, they're the 32nd pick. So I don't know if that wide receiver is better than Rashee Rice at this point. Rashee Rice had a really, really good rookie season. If you go and look at the numbers, he was the second most in the NFL yards after the catch per reception with 8.1. The only other player to have over 8 yards after the catch per reception is Deebo Samuel. That is elite ability at the NFL level. Rashee Rice fits it. He does it. His yards per route run, it was 17th, up there with Amari Cooper. Rashee Rice put together an incredible rookie season. He plays for the best quarterback in the NFL, and everyone wants the next thing. The Chiefs have gotten what they want. They used him a ton in the playoffs. They love Rashee Rice. His snap count went up throughout the season, and once he got to the final quarter of the season, he was their bona fide wide receiver 1, and we saw it through the playoffs. I just don't understand the hesitancy to buy into Rashee Rice. I mean, I have him here as the wide receiver 20, and that's considered high. And I understand there's other guys, in this next tier that we're going to be talking about that you could certainly argue over Rashee Rice. But at the end of the day, none of those guys have Mahomes as their quarterback. And that's the difference for me. And I think Mahomes has found his next wide receiver. He practiced with Rashee Rice before the draft. He picked Rashee Rice. He told the Chiefs, this is the guy I want. I trained with him in the offseason. Go get this guy. And then it worked out. This is like the CJ Stroud, Tank Dell stuff, but for Mahomes, and everyone's just looking for the next thing already. I don't get it. This is what we've all been waiting for. We finally got it. And because his name is Rashee Rice, we don't like it. I don't get it, Bob. I'm in. I think wide receiver 20-ish is probably low if he truly is the wide receiver 1 for Mahomes. Sure. But, there is a lot of talent in front of him. But we're talking about because he's Mahomes' wide receiver 1 and because he can put up 8.1 yards after the catch per reception, and that works really well in Mahomes' kind of offense where he wants to get the ball out quick, there's a pathway for Rashee Rice to become a top 12 wide receiver. Certainly. And with the upside that brings, I think you have to put him above some of the other guys that are usually ranked around him because of just that upside where he doesn't have a lot of target competition. He could be the wide receiver 1, and he's got Mahomes. That is the tiebreaker, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't hate this at all. I like I said, I'm more just surprised to see him above, and more like sticker shock because, when you break it down, it makes sense. When we get into the next tier, you'll kind of get what I'm saying. But, I am with you on not understanding or the hesitancy to buy in because, in all honesty, when a player has done really well, whenever has good process equated to, well, they're probably just going to draft somebody else.
When has that ever? I expect them to draft somebody else.
They probably should.
They should.
Get some better talent there. The Sky Moore has not panned out. Miko Hardman was drafted when Tyreek Hill was still there, but
Mhm.
obviously he's not panned out. Not only did Rashee Rice have a really good regular season, he had an amazing postseason. Recorded the reception record for a rookie in the postseason.
Yeah.
And good luck anybody beating that, because you're probably not going to be the wide receiver one on a Super Bowl team anytime soon again. So good luck beating that, unless you're just getting peppered with targets in week 1 and 2, I guess, or whatever. But either way, I am in with you on this. And the thing is, I still think there's, because that's always been the number one comment, is that, well, they're going to draft somebody. And there have
There's
been
room.
comments.
There's plenty of room for another wide receiver or 2 to go in there.
Well, you think about it, this is like one of the worst passing offenses we've had in the Mahomes era.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, volume wise, there's room to grow, especially with,
And
at some
efficiency-wise.
point, efficiency too. And when eventually Kelsey is going to move on, or, not be as much of a fixture in the offense, there's going to be even more room. And, I just think that, well, I don't like him because they're going to draft somebody. If you want to like him for whatever statistical, analytical, no, don't like the prospect in general reason, fine. Because they're going to draft somebody is not a good enough reason, because we know as well as anybody that draft prospects do not always work out. And the Chiefs' track record with wide receivers lately has not been great. So you throw that into the mix. Anything else you want to get in arguments about, fine. And like I said, that's been the number one comment. Well, they're going to draft somebody. And there have been comments in rebuttal to those saying, like, well, so what? Like, we're
Mhm.
saying, there's room for expansion. There's room for more people to contribute, whatever the case is. And it's no guarantee that player's going to be any good. So them's the thoughts, them's the breaks. Wrapping up the top 20. We're going to get through the top 24, talks through some honorable mentions as well, or dishonorable, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, because it didn't make the top 24, however you want to look at it. But get into this next tier. And this is another fun tier. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun players in this tier, and I think we're going to see a lot of movement from these players up coming this season. So the all these players are very similar. They're all second-year players. They all have pretty good draft capital, and they're all very well liked by their teams. So we got Tank Dell, number 1, and I want to address him because I think a lot of people probably have Tank Dell higher ranked than I do. And it's not because I don't believe in the talent of Tank Dell, what he did in his time. I mean, you look at the efficiency stats and like yard per route run, things like that, and he's off the charts. I just want to see it a bit more. I don't have a ton of size concern with him, but we do have Nico Collins there, and I think Nico Collins just fits the more stereotypical wide receiver 1 in the NFL, and I think there is credibility to that because you have to last in the NFL. It's a hard sport to not be injured in. It's a hard sport to stay physical in. And Tank Dell is an extremely excellent talent, and he's able to win despite his shortcomings. But Nico Collins just has less shortcomings, and therefore I have him higher ranked. And if you look at Tank Dell, you're like, oh well, look what he did his rookie year. Tank Dell and Nico Collins are the same age, and that really brings it full circle to me. It's easy to look at these guys. Well, he's a rookie. This is what he did, and there's definitely some semblance to that. You come in here your rookie year, you learn the playbook, and you put out great stats. That's impressive. But also, both these guys are 24. Nico Collins gets a long-term extension in Houston. I should have these guys similarly ranked, and so far, I just give the edge to Nico Collins. Seeing what he's done, I think he's overall currently the better wide receiver. So I have him pretty highly ranked up there. But Tank Dell, I'd be happy to pick him up on any team, that's for sure. Want to see him come back off the injury, though. Want to see how he kind of settles in as the other wide receiver there with Nico Collins. I think it probably will end up being a 1A, 1B situation, but also it could be a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 situation. Either way, I think both will be productive. But I do have Tank Dell a little bit lower than I think some people do.
Yeah, and I get it. I think he could be a little higher. But again, there's nothing wrong with being a very good wide receiver too. Saying that he's here, not a slight on the guy at all, because I think he is extremely talented. We loved him as a player, as a prospect, and our biggest, question mark was his size, and justifiably so. Very short in stature. You said shortcomings, and I was like, well, that's kind of a shot But,
Yeah.
love the player, love the talent. And again, talent kind of rules out, or wins out, I should say. But
I still
I
have him
get
here with
the
a lot of really talented guys. Like,
exactly,
it's not a
and,
low ranking.
exactly, and I just think I know how some people perceive these ranks, and with a lot of these guys, we are kind of splitting hairs, at the end of the day, because there's just so much talent at the top.
If you have a
We
top
get to
26 wide receiver, you have a good wide receiver.
yeah, exactly, and especially when you can, have the expectation, the realistic expectation of what they can be in your lineup. At the end of the day, I think is huge. So let's keep on rolling with this tier. This next player is probably the one I was most surprised to not see over or with Rashee Rice, just because I know you're a huge fan.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking ahead, I think I get it. Tell me about it.
Yep. Next up is Jordan Addison, who had a really good rookie season as well. But just to go ahead and address why he's not higher, Justin Jefferson's there. So
Yeah.
there's a limit to his ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
He can be a really, really good wide receiver too, but he's just not going to have that wide receiver one upside until he's on a different team. So if that's how it works out, that's fine. I think Jordan Addison can still be a really great contributor in your fantasy lineup, especially if Kirk Cousins goes back to the Vikings. We've seen the fact that Kirk Cousins can support two very high fantasy producers, but Addison's always going to be that number two to Justin Jefferson. No matter how good he is, Justin Jefferson is just better. So, that just kind of keeps him down in this tier 6, down in tier 6 for me. Still very, very talented and put up really good numbers with Justin Jefferson across from him last year, and still look good when he was the wide receiver one when Jefferson was out. I'd like seeing that versatility, that he didn't need Jefferson across from him to be productive. He was still able to, with bad quarterback play, be productive as a wide receiver one. So I really liked seeing that from Jordan Addison. That really solidified that he has a good floor while still offering that ceiling. But in the situation that he is, that ceiling is just a little bit lower than maybe some of the other players.
Yeah, I don't disagree with this at all, and I think that over time, another player I think we could see rise real
Yeah.
easily because of if you compare the first thing that came to mind when we were talking Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, is kind of the comparison we have with Devonta Smith and AJ Brown, which I think are kind of light comparisons to each other. That Jordan Addison could be a similar tier up above and be similarly differently spaced between the two, and we'd think nothing of it. So I think he's a guy that could rise upwards eventually too. But love the player, and I love this next player.
I'm still a believer, Bob, for sure.
Good.
I think this player had the rookie season that we both kind of expected, to be real, and now we're still buying in. We're excited for next season. JSN, Jackson Smith and the Jigba, one of our favorite wide receivers coming out of the draft last year, going to a team with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And Tyler Lockett is still a really good wide receiver, actually out-targeted DK Metcalf this year for the Seahawks. I don't think Tyler Lockett's on the team in 2024. The Seahawks can save a lot of money cutting him or trading him. And if that does happen, or whether it does not happen, I think there's still going to be a natural progression where JSN becomes that wide receiver 2, maybe even the wide receiver 1 for the Seahawks. If Tyler Lockett is gone, I have said before on this channel that I expect JSN to out-target DK Metcalf just because of his role in that offense out of the slot and how they've been using DK Metcalf down the field. I know there's a new staff there, but I think anyone coming in, looking at how those two wide receivers play, that is the best way to get the most out of them, how to let them be most efficient with their time and their opportunities. So DK Metcalf obviously always going to get a lot of targets because he's going to make sure he gets them. But JSN, I think with his role out of the slot and how consistent and how good his hands are, and any quarterback, especially Geno Smith, is going to love throwing to him and helping him move the chains. So JSN, only 22 years old, still an incredible college profile, first-round wide receiver, still made incredible plays this rookie season. Maybe the raw numbers weren't there, but he was the wide receiver 3 behind two wide receivers that are very, very good. So I'm still a believer. I think he's going to be a top 2 wide receiver on that offense this year. And with the expected progression, I think he's going to break 1,000 yards this year. I think he could have 100 receptions, things like that. I think he's going to have a really good second year. I think he's going to be moving up from this tier pretty quickly, but we need Tyler Lockett to move on. We need that offense to be humming with the new staff until we see that he's here with these other guys. I think a really good value right now, actually.
Yeah, I love Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I think the best part about him is, and it obviously depends on your league. This is a guy that another player that I think you can be on both sides of the fence on with, because his rookie year did leave a lot to be desired. I think a lot of people expected we kind of hope to see more of a progression for him to surpass Tyler Lockett at some
Yeah,
time to really make this, cut predictable. And a good reason why he's likely to be cut, there's 17 million reasons why.
a lot
If
of different
Tyler
values.
Lockett's cut with a post June 1 cut per overthecap.com, the Seahawks will save $17 million. And that's not a big chunk of change to
Yeah,
get your, young rookie, now sophomore wide receiver involved that much more in the offense. And, looking over everything, Jackson Smith and Jigba had the deck stacked against him so much. If you want to get into like raw numbers and analytics and historical data of like that says, well, JSN's probably not going to be what we wanted him to be. Look at those players that are involved in that data and tell me how many of them had top 20 wide receivers in the league ahead of him, ahead of those
yeah.
players. There's just not many. How many of those guys broke their hand in the preseason and was, somewhat limited,
Still came
couldn't
out.
still played weeks 1 and on, but obviously missed some time, at the tail end of the preseason to practice and everything. And, then also just throughout the season being on a team that was not great offensive wise. They were much less efficient than they were the year prior. Bottom half of the league in touchdowns scored on the passing touchdowns scored in the offense, bottom half of the league in passing yardage, passing plays. Opportunity just purely was not there. It was so hard to get him any work. Hopefully, we see a more efficient system come in. That's the hope, at least. And the thing is, too, is when Tyler Lockett is cut, again, another player your door I could think kind of slam shut
Yep.
on. We had a couple trades come through in our Discord recently in the last, I think, week and a half now. One was moving the 203 and 209 for JSN in Superflex leagues. And another one was moving Brian Robinson in the 204 for JSN, which I think that one's a little more
Yeah.
still
A
low,
value,
I think.
but
But I think it's a little more like
makes more sense
sensible.
if that's like positional need.
Exactly. And everything like that, you keep some more youth opportunity on your team, whatever the case is. But and not saying you're going to get those exact deals done again, but that's just a way we kind of emphasize like, hey, it's worth knocking on the door because,
Yep.
being a rookie, a lot of the times with rookies, and maybe we're kind of past the point of really being able to do this, but keep this in your toolkit for next year, is a lot of times with rookies, when people draft them and they have strong convictions or they don't, whatever the case is, there's that huge like alarm that goes off in your head saying, well, oh man, this guy might be a bust. I got to get rid of him. I got to get some value. I got to recoup value before his value's dead. These are the opportunities you have to go buy these guys for lower than they should be. And I think JSN right now is a poster child for that for me, and somebody who I absolutely expect to rise up this board very quickly once we get to the season. Quickly again, if we do see a Tyler Lockett cutting. But with that said, let's round out this bottom of the tier, or not bottom of the tier, but let's round out this tier here. Get to a player that is very near and dear to you. Talk about him.
Yeah, the last player in this tier, fitting the mold of all these second-year wide receivers, is Zay Flowers. First-round pick for the Ravens last year, was the wide receiver one for the Ravens from the get-go, which I talked about throughout the offseason, that he was set up to be the wide receiver one for this team right away. It worked out that way. Ended up seeing over 100 targets, which, hey, for the Ravens offense the past couple of years has been kind of hard to find someone with that kind of volume. Zay Flowers had in his rookie season 77 receptions for 858 yards. He's the wide receiver one for Lamar, and that's the two-time MVP. There's definitely conversation where, the wide receiver one for Lamar and that offense and how it's run, maybe volume-wise not as lucrative as some of these other offenses, but we saw the Ravens offense this year be a lot more pass heavy, a lot of short passes, didn't really go down the field a lot, but that fits well with how Zay is used. His ability to create yards after the catch is also it's a little bit different than Rashee Rice, Deebo Samuel. He's much more elusive after the catch than kind of a physical runner. But with his elusiveness, it's that kind of elusiveness after the catch we've only really seen a couple times with guys like Kadarius Toney. Can make someone miss in a telephone booth, they've said. But Kadarius Toney doesn't get on the field. Zay Flowers has and seems to, that kind of ability after the catch is special. And just the fact that he can make people miss and create his own yards. I love wide receivers that can create their own yards after the catch. Any player that can create their own yards, whether it's a running back, a tight end, or whatever, teams love that because sure, you can manufacture touches, you can set up plays where they get you the ball, but for someone to be able to make something happen after that, that is that next level that teams are looking for. That's who they want to get the ball to. And we saw that with Zay Flowers. He was the most targeted player on their team. He is the wide receiver one for the team. I do expect them to bring in competition. I do expect Rashad Bateman to have a better year next year. He's kind of coming off a big surgery on his foot over the offseason, and we know that foot injuries don't really go well usually with wide receivers. Bateman's also going into a contract year, so that always ends up doing well for wide receivers. So I expect this offense to look a little bit better passing-wise next year. As Zay Flower goes into his second year, Bateman is going into a contract year, and I do expect them to bring somebody in probably day 2, early day 3. But Zay Flowers is the wide receiver one there. He plays out the slot, plays out of the wide position, all over the field. They get him sweep screens. There was times they were just feeding him screens on drives just to get him the ball. And I just love seeing players scheme touches in that way. Not like, okay, hey, we're going to get you like 5 touches a game, but they all have to be schemed. No, this is the Ravens just trying to get the ball in Zay Flowers' hands. That's what you want to see because you want to see players that teams trust to get the ball. We've seen that with these other rookie wide receivers. Zay Flowers fits into this tier just as well. I like what I see with the Ravens offense moving forward. Lamar's the top quarterback. A lot of people have had questions about his arm. He's answered those. He's been a much better thrower recently. Deep ball was a little off this year, but in the past, he's been really good at that. So I expect him to continue to get better with Zay. I love this rookie class that we saw last year at the wide receiver position. I love what's coming in 2024, but the 2023 class is really good. And I'm excited about their second years.
Yeah, you and me both. And I like the round out of this tier. I like what we got in the top 24, but there are 2 players that we feel both stick out. And now they are in your next tier, but we do feel like there are 2 players specifically that are omitted from the top 24. And I believe people will be talking about. So we got to talk about them as honorable, dishonorable mentions, however you want to phrase it.
I feel like they belong in the top 24. I just don't know where to put them, honestly.
Sure. You could argue they're in the top 25 based on how the tier kind of breaks, but but either way, I'm with you, but it's just very hard with when you take what we've seen from these players so far and what we're kind of hoping to see with progression wise from these other wideouts in the offseason. As we discussed pre-show, youth really does kind of take a driver's seat, and productive aged assets who haven't necessarily met their apex of production yet kind of take a back seat. So that could be some of it here, but let's talk about these 2 players who are in your tier 7 that we omitted from the top 6 tiers, the top 24.
We got 2 players here, T. Higgins and DK Metcalf. Bob, I think you've said this before, the term big brother wide receiver 2s or something like that. And that's how DK Metcalf and T. Higgins have kind of been sitting for the last couple of years. Higgins, obviously, with Jamar Chase across from him. Metcalf, as good as he's been, Lockett has kind of been their wide receiver 1 from a target perspective and from an efficiency perspective, even at times as well. And if we have JSN turn into what we believe JSN to be, DK Metcalf, while I don't think he's really the wide receiver 2 there, if JSN hits, I think he's kind of the wide receiver 1B. If JSN hits the ceiling that we're hoping he hits. And I think that works for both these guys, but I think it limits their upside. And with T. Higgins and Metcalf, we've seen wide receiver 2 numbers over the past couple of seasons. We haven't seen those wide receiver 1 numbers that we were hoping they would hit with both of them have really impressive frames that allow them to kind of take over a game at times. And we were hoping that would translate to some top 12 seasonal finishes. And we haven't really got out of them in a while. Metcalf, it's been a bit since he was a wide receiver 1, and T. Higgins has never had that season finish. Higgins is going to be a free agent. I expect him to stay in with the Bengals. I expect them to franchise tag him most likely, but the year after that, he's probably hitting free agency. DK Metcalf is going to be hitting free agency in 2 years. I think both of these guys could be better for fantasy on different teams, but they're also really good right now. So it's hard to not include them in the players we've already talked about, because if I'm a competitive team, if I can move off of some of the guys we've talked about previously and get draft capital on top of Higgins or Metcalf, and I'm a competitive team, I'm certainly willing to do that. I don't think we're really downgrading too much to these guys. They're still productive. They're still young. They're not young enough to maybe have the upside of some of these guys we have above them, and they haven't been quite productive enough at their current age to be as high as maybe some of these guys, like a Nico Collins or a DJ Moore, who we have seen, hit that wide receiver one finish a little bit more recently.
And now I'm going to throw a surprise question at you because I just thought of it.
Oh, thank you.
If you were to pick anybody in the next however many tiers, not including tier 7, which is T. Higgins and DK Metcalf, if you were to pick anybody who you believe could ascend quickly into this top 24 that we discussed today, who would it be? The board is yours. Pick anybody.
All right. I'm actually going to go, this is like a cheap answer, but I'm going to go with the next rookie up in my rankings.
I had a feeling.
Brian Thomas Jr. And this is a mixture of the fact that I think Brian Thomas Jr. is talented. I have him graded out as a first-round wide receiver, and I think the NFL is so far on pace with that as well. So there's certainly the talent of Brian Thomas Jr., which fits in with the tier 6, talking about Zay Flowers, JSN, Jordan Addison, and Tank Dell. If we did a redraft, he would be a first-round pick as well. So, similar draft capital to what we expect with Brian Thomas Jr. And what I like about Brian Thomas's expected situation is his draft capital is expected to be somewhere between 20, 26, that kind of back half of the first round, which we saw with Jordan Addison. We've seen with some players really take off well, Zay Flowers as well. His expected landing spot right now, the consensus is the Bills. If it's a different team, it's either way, it's likely a competitive team with a quarterback already that is really good, and they're just adding Brian Thomas in. Now, if it's the Bills, you could argue he's the wide receiver 2, next to Stephon Diggs. Some people might argue he's, the wide receiver 1, and that could come to fruition. But I think, let's cool him Diggs a little bit. He's still a pretty good NFL wide receiver. But if Brian Thomas goes to the Bills, by the end of his rookie season, whether it's the Bills or another team somewhere in the 20s, and he's starting off as a wide receiver 2, I think there's plenty of opportunity for him to jump into this top 24, at least be in a similar place to where we have guys like Jordan Addison, JSN ranked currently. If not, maybe get into a tier above those guys because of his frame, his draft capital, the ability that, like I've said before, I think he can hit all 3 of those little triangle that we're looking for in a wide receiver. So Brian Thomas, I think he's got the natural ability. I think he's going to end up in a good landing spot. He's going to have the draft capital. He's going to have all the pieces there for him to ascend into this top 25. The question is just, will he be able to live up to the expectations?
Love it, Nate. And I love you being able to roll with that surprise question that I just cooked up here in my lab last minute.
You want me to come up with a player that's maybe not a rookie?
No, that's fine. I thought that was a great pick. That's kind of who I pegged you to pick. And I think it makes sense. Honestly, looking ahead at everybody else, there's maybe a couple other considerations. I would have considered Jaden Reed to make a run up there. But I think right now, until that Packer wide receiver room gets sorted, a little early to put in there. And we love Jaden Reed's talent. And I love that he's on my team and I get to root for him, as much as those Packers piss me off sometimes, and got to keep everything close. That would probably be one of my picks to ascend, because everybody else that we kind of got here is a lot of like aged value.
Yeah.
And that's why it makes it hard to project a lot of them to rise up. Otherwise you need a lot of people to fall, just because, and maybe it looks a little different in season kind of a thing, but that would probably be my pick looking ahead. And I think you're probably in somewhat of an agreement on that.
Yeah. Jaden Reed. A lot of these are guys, like we said, like, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, guys like that, they're not really ascending at this point in their career. One guy that, if you want to kind of a dark horse veteran to rise up boards, I would say Chris Godwin. He's not that old. I believe he's 27. So he's in his prime as a wide receiver. There's, Mike Evans is going to be a free agent. I do expect him to stay with the Buccaneers now that they made the playoffs. They're going to, want to keep that squad together and try to make another run. They have the fun offense in Tampa Bay. There's Chris Godwin has always had really good target share, even with Mike Evans there. I think there's always opportunity for Chris Godwin to kind of move up, because while he's not the most flashiest name, he's very productive.
Sure. Yeah. I don't hate that. And I know there was some, speculation with him getting a larger role in this new offense.
In the new offense, talking about him. I think they
the
said
F
the F
rule
wide
or something.
receiver. Yeah,
Yeah,
which
which who knows what
I
that
don't
is,
know.
but
Well, they said it was the Cooper Cup role or something like that. So we'll see. We've heard that a couple times.
yeah, it's always the Cooper Cup rule until it isn't any good with other
Until
players
it's
that aren't
not Cooper
Cooper
Cup.
Cup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But with all that said, wrapping all these rankings up, Nate, appreciate you hopping on and sharing all these with us and all of the viewers. And if you want more rankings, including my own, Mike's rookie rankings, my full Dynasty rankings, overall rankings, and everything else we have to offer with Patreon, bonus podcasts, a ton of bonus podcasts, a whole lineup of bonus podcasts, and then our probably the best thing, one of the best things we have to offer, the community Discord.
Yeah.
Hop in there anytime, talk about anything you want, 24/7 with the entire community. Get involved with trade discussions, strategy discussions, and literally anything you could possibly want. Find leagues there, find orphan teams there, whatever you could possibly want out of a Discord. It's there in a beautiful, organized layout that makes it very easy to navigate and enjoy that much more. With all that said, that is going to be it for us in this one. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment down below. I know we're going to disagree on ranks, and that's okay. Tell us who is too high, who is too low, who would you have on this list that didn't make it, who would you take out of the top 25. That's one of the things we want to encourage. Discussion and disagreements are okay. Let's keep it cordial in the comments, though. Shout out, you guys. Love all of you for your support. But with that said, we are going to get the heck on out of here, and we will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.